There's a lot more going on. I'm not going to read them all to you, other than to just bring your attention to the fact that beginning with the SoCatch conversation about his book and then continuing through the next few months, we are engaging in, as I'm going to talk about tonight, a deep dive into Israel. And we'll have a scholar in residence at the end of the month of March, Joel Chasnoff, who you may know from his work with our Chutzpah Festival. Joel is an Israeli comedian, and he's also an educator. And he's going to come and do both comedy and education with us about Israel in his new book, Israel 201. So be sure to keep an eye out for that information. So, first of all, again, it's good to be back and to see you all. So the question comes up, what do we do about Israel? What to do about Israel? For those that remember the early sitcom, and here I'm going even earlier than the 80s, I'm going like to the 50s and 60s. Leave It to Beaver. Do you remember Leave It to Beaver? Yeah. Do you really, Joyce? That's terrific. It's still on. Still leaving it to the Beaver. So the question, what to do about Israel, has that same tone of when June turns to her husband and says with grave concern, Ward, I'm worried about the beaver. Right? You know that question? June raises alarm about the beaver, and it is different than our concern about global warming or the war in Ukraine or even the housing crisis here in Vancouver, which are all distressing and worrisome issues. But Ward, I'm worried about the beaver. That's more personal. That's a family thing. That's like when you see someone in your family in crisis and your heart breaks and your sleep is interrupted, and in every moment in between, all your thoughts turn only to that person, are consumed by them and their worries. I'm well aware that not all of us here or those of us watching online relate to Israel as part of our family. The reasons for that are generational, they're sociological, they're moral, they're political. I've talked about it before, about the growing chasm between diaspora and Israeli Jewry, and that is even more so among young and progressive North American Jews. But I'm going to call this moment that we are in, this moment of challenge with Israel, this moment of the beaver, leave it to beaver question, I'm going to call it a 23andMe moment. You know 23andMe, it's that, nobody knew the beaver, but you're all nodding, 23andMe, I know that. That's that DNA company that helps you uncover long-distant, never-known relatives. Some of those connections are as tenuous as they are held at first by only a slight strand of DNA, can still make a claim on us. Somehow when we discover that we have a cousin that we never knew about, that thread of connection is not only DNA, but it's a heartstring as well. Before 23andMe, maybe the best example of this, and it's a painful and challenging example, heartwarming also, were the letters that our grandparents received from distant family that they may have never known in Eastern Europe. Letters pleading for someone here on this side of the Atlantic to sponsor them so they could get out, so they could get their children out, so they could get family members they had never met out and to safety. Many families in our community are here because in a moment of despair, a grandparent reached out to a distant relative and said, please help save us. We're family. So whether it's a connection to Israel like that of a close family member or that of a distant relative that you have never met but now learn is in desperate need, Israel, its land and its people, they are family. And Ward, I'm worried about the beaver. First, a bit of history. The current state of Israel is only the third time that there has been a Jewish sovereign state in the land of Israel in all of our history, 3,000 plus years of history as a people of Israel, and was ultimately wiped out in what were largely civil wars amongst the successive kings of Israel. That, by the way, is why parts of our Haftorah and parts of our Hebrew Bible, particularly the writings, are so difficult to read because they are bloody and uncomfortable. We are literally in the text, killing each other in every generation. We, Jews, doing it to each other. In the end of that first sovereign reign, 80% of the Jewish people were wiped out because we fought internally. We wiped 80% of ourselves out. All of us, all the Jews that remain in the world, whether Sephardic, Ashkenazic, Mizrahi, Ethiopian Jews, maybe a question there, are descendants of Judea. That's, by the way, why we're called Jews, because we come from Judea. Okay, so 1,000 years after that, forward, during the Second Temple period, we had a nation state, and it lasted for 75 years. This was the Maccabees, the Hasmonean dynasty. Remember Hanukkah and dreidel, and miracle of oil? It was those guys. They founded a Jewish state in the land of Israel after kicking the Seleucids, sometimes we call them the Assyrian Greeks, out of Jerusalem and the southern kingdom. And the sovereign reign of the Maccabees, it lasted for 75 years. But at 76 years, they fought with each other. And once again, it was Jews on Jews violence and civil war. And so the Romans come in. Some say we invited them in. And we lost not only Jerusalem and our holy temple that we talk about tomorrow in our Parsha, we lost the whole state, the sovereignty of our people. So 80 years and 75 years. And now, the modern state of Israel, for only the third time in the history, the long history of the Jewish people, once again, we have a sovereign state. And you know how old Israel is about to be? 75. Jewish sovereignty has never passed our 8th decade as a united and sovereign nation. And why? Of all the things that have befallen us as a people, of all the horrible things that have happened to Jews, it's because of us that we never made it past 8 decades. We did this to ourselves every single time. The Romans laid siege on Jerusalem, but between the two warring factions of Jews, they had enough grain stored within the walls of the city between these two factions to last for 22 years. And what did these two factions of Jews do? They burnt each other's storehouses. You can go to archaeological digs, you can find remnants of it now. We burnt the food of our brother. To prove a point. The Romans laying siege outside, we were starving inside because of our own doing, a self-inflicted wound. And they came in and ransacked the city and destroyed us. And then we had 2,000 years of a mess. 2,000 years of the most horrible things that humanity has perhaps ever seen. And all this happened to us, because we could not get along in our family. And so here we are again, 75 years into the third act of, from my perspective, we are doing it again. With the strongest army in the region, a robust and creative economy, innovation like the world has never seen, a home and a safe haven to Jews from every corner of the globe, 50,000 immigrants, mostly women and children from Russia and Ukraine, who came to Israel just this last year. 150,000 from Ethiopia, and others still coming. Israel has an iron dome that covers over its land to protect its citizens from terrorist rocket attacks. And what is our undoing? What is causing us to come up to the precipice of peril? What is our greatest threat? It's us. The family is in turmoil. We are already so separated and so isolated, like I talked about before. Think where I started with our relationship with Israel and Israelis, and all Israelis, including the ones that don't accept your Judaism, your conversion, your children, your Orthodox way of prayer, of doing, of being Jewish. We feel so separated from them. We are long past divorce. And I don't mean to be glib about this, but as relationships go, we are so dysfunctional as a Jewish family that we're approaching murder-suicide. It is that serious. If all of this is news to you, I urge you to read the Israeli press, it's in English as well, and learn what you may not have fully known or appreciated. For the past 2 months since the election of the new ultra-right-wing nationalist government, 100,000 Israelis have protested every Saturday night, Motzi Shabbos, in Tel Aviv. Tens of thousands more each week outside the Knesset in Jerusalem and around the country. The largest protests in the history of the country, in the history of the Jewish people. It's about 7 a.m. right now in Israel on Shabbos morning, and in a few hours, those hundreds of thousands in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem around the country will take to the streets again, demanding justice, equality, and truly a representative democracy. In the face of dangerous legislative initiatives whose goals are to weaken the legal system and to endanger the checks and balances of Israeli democracy, the new government seeks to limit the rights of minorities in a way that truly endangers the pluralistic nature of the Israeli state and even its existence as a democratic state. This is the home of the entire Jewish people, and that, as history has shown us, is in danger. And when it is in danger, it endangers the whole of the Jewish people. We often joke that Jews rarely agree. 2 Jews and 3 opinions, it's funny because it's true. And families have disagreements all the time. There's nothing new here in that regard. Just think about the last conversation maybe you had around your Seder table, if not before or after. But what is new is that when you fight within your family, when we fight within our families, we pull our punches. We hold back. We hold back the most hurtful things, the most hurtful blows and woundful words. Because deep down in the midst of a raging argument with your family, you love each other. Families have a history and they have an assumption of a future together. And because if you don't stop yourself from saying and doing the most hurtful things, then you stop being a family, and then you get a divorce. And you move out of the house, or you cancel each other in the myriad of ways that we cancel each other nowadays. And we cannot cancel Israel. We cannot get a divorce amongst the Jewish people. We cannot fight like we are fighting right now. We cannot fight like this, like we did 3,000 years ago, like we did 2,000 years ago. And we know how this ends. We have been here before. The psalmist says, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand wither and lose its ability to grasp." And so what do we do so that we don't forget thee, O Jerusalem, and that Jerusalem doesn't forget all of us? What can we do from here in Vancouver? Our Jewish family is already so spread out, so divided. We start with Torah. We are commanded not only to guard justice, peace, and human rights, we are required to be actively concerned about the implementation of those rights. As it is written, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice, you must pursue it. Seek and pursue it. Seek peace and pursue it. We have a moral duty to not let our family disintegrate before our eyes. That's the first step, to not let this happen. Pursuing justice means that we have a duty to show up and contribute to our family, to participate in designing a just society, one that promotes the values of liberty, of equality, and peace. Those are Jewish values. And when those values are in danger, when our family is in danger, even if the wounds are self-inflicted, we must not be silent. We are obligated to protest. The words of the great civil rights leader, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, and theologian, to pray with our feet and to work towards the repair of society, the healing of our family. That's the second step, is to do the work. And right now the work is protest. The next step on that journey is supporting Israelis in Israel who are marching in the streets in the spirit of the verse, "Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor." They are performing the mitzvah of protest, and they need our moral and financial support there in Israel, where the battle is raging. Not here. Not from our art gallery steps in Vancouver or the comfort of your Facebook and Twitter feeds, where you're really only talking in the echo chamber of everybody that always agrees with you. We're not going to solve the problem on our steps here, on our Facebook feeds. No, we need to raise up the voices in Israel that stand on guard over the democratic framework that constitutes the basis for a free and democratic society in Israel, in the Jewish homeland, in the midst and the epicenter of the dangerous polarization and division within our Jewish family. And so we need to support the work of the Reform movement in Israel, the Israel Religious Action Center, and join with Jewish Federations of North America. Maybe you saw Ezra's message this afternoon, who for the first time in the history of that umbrella organization has taken a firm stand in a position that these proposed judicial and civil reforms will endanger the Jewish people, endanger the Jewish state. And then our next step. Of all of this, we must remember and emphasize that we are family. We have an obligation to each other that is stronger than any other bond. We must be a family that allows and encourages dialogue among diverse opinions, a truly pluralistic family and society in which it is possible and even desirable and important to live together and openly listen and honestly debate in a spirit of acceptance and dignity, and ahavat Yisrael, and a love of the Jewish people, not just the land. When a family is in crisis, when a family member is in crisis, those that love them hold an intervention. They gather together and they show the loved one through word and through deed how much they care and how deeply they are troubled and how willing they are to work together to help them find a path to wholeness and to healing. A path that keeps them, that loved one who is in trouble, that keeps them in the family, and in fact brings the family, that circle, even closer together. As I imagine Ward said to June, let's get the family together, remind each other what we mean to each other, and find a way to be a loving family again. Because if we don't, who will? And then, God forbid, what will become of the beaver, but more importantly, what will become of the Jewish family? Shabbat Shalom.